It's the Reading Cow, friend of the world, with another exciting and thrilling episode of edifications with great ramifications for your vindications of the scintillations with the effervescent and ebullient clarifications with the bedtime stories for the baby. And today we're going to go back in time to circa. You know what circa is? Circa? See. Yeah, okay. Yeah, circa. Circa sort of means like around about the time, but we're not exactly sure what year it was, but it was around that time. So that's what circa means. So, couple of things people don't sometimes realize in that, like we're in 2020 AD, and people say to me, yeah, that means after death. Jesus died, and after he died, we say after his death. So this is 2020 AD. But they don't know that that means 2020 years, and they also, they don't realize that that's not after his death. It means in the year of his life. Just so you know, AD means Anno Domini, which is, I believe that's Latin for in the year of our Lord Jesus. So don't forget it. It's common now to say CE, which means Common Era, and BCE, which is before the Common Era. But we're going to talk today about the Christian society. At that time, I'm talking about the time of Procopius of Caesarea. So Caesarea is in Palestine. It was built during the Roman control of the period. I think there was some really advanced engineering feats that were done at Caesarea that were described in Josephus, but people didn't believe it. And it wasn't until modern archaeological researchers had advanced underwater equipment that they were able to go down under the water and see remnants of Roman construction in Caesarea that were astounding feats of stuff, engineering, and stuff like that. So Procopius, 490, circa 490, and that means AD or Common Era if you prefer. And what that means is that, Jesus supposedly was born in the year 0, and then he's crucified about the year 30, and then resurrected and went up to heaven and seated at the right hand of the Father, and will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. But we are at the point in the Roman Empire where it's been several 500 years. He's still working on coming back, but he hasn't come back yet. But if you think back, I can't, I don't have it right in front of me, but Constantine the Great was a Roman emperor, and he is the guy that said, I had a dream that I could kill the people I hate if I worshipped the cross. And so I woke up and I told everybody to put the cross as a sign of our power at the head of the army. And we went out and we slaughtered everybody. And you know what? From now on, I'm going to follow Jesus and the cross, because when I need to kill people, I don't need to be messing around with the wrong God. I want to know that when I worship his and praise his ego or whatever, that my enemies I'm going to be aided in the slaughter of them and the murder and the plunder and the sacking of them. And so from now on, we're going to stop persecuting Christians in Rome, and we're going to make Christianity the Roman religion, the official religion of the Roman Empire. So I don't know. Somebody tell me in the comments at some point, but I think Constantine was around almost 300 years, like 270 or something like that. So about 2.5 centuries, the Romans persecuted Christians, and you got the death penalty for worshiping Jesus. And then it was that simple. This guy was getting ready to go out to battle, and he was like, I wish God would inspire me, the true God, would reveal himself in some manner that would allow me to know who he was, so I could worship him, because I know he's going to love his ego is going to be like, oh yeah, I love this worship from powerful people. Yeah. And then I'll be able to, and then when I worship him, he's going to help me kill these people that I hate, so I can just indulge my murderous hatred and conquer and destroy my enemies. And so it worked. He put the cross at the head of the Roman army, went out the next day. He cut the enemy to pieces, and he was like, okay, from now on, Rome's going to be Christian, whatever that means, because he didn't really bother to ever learn what it meant. Well, that's disputed, but most likely it was just, henotheism. I want to worship the God that's going to beat the other guy's God, or whatever. More simplistic kind of thinking like that. So, anyway, we're moving along through history, perhaps another 100, 200, close to 300 years. Okay, so introduction. We're gonna learn about Procopius Anecdota, right? And it was a book that he said, if I wrote this stuff down, and we'll get to this, he said, if I wrote this stuff down, I would be executed, because I know a lot of stuff that the powers that be want to keep sort of under a hat. And so he wrote all this stuff down, and he hid it, and nobody knew it was there. And then when he died, copies of it came out, right? So today, in addition, and you should look at Procopius's other work, right? These shouldn't be taken by themselves. But like me, the first thing I wanted to see is I want to see the secret stuff, the stuff that couldn't be revealed during the life of the people in power, right? And later on I'll get to the other things that he wrote. And down the road I did read it, and I think, really now is a point of advice that when you get into Procopius's writing, that you should read all the stuff, so you can compare, and maybe even get in, when you're working on your history degree or whatever, you could get into the whole debate about, well, Procopius, praised these people when he was alive. So is this other book where he's like, these guys were jerks, is it really some revelation, or is it some revelation, or is it a something written by somebody else? Okay, so back to business. I had a little, interruption there. Somebody very rudely started banging on the door in the middle of my work while I'm trying to provide this service to the scholarly community. Okay, so I'm back to Procopius of Caesarea in Palestine. Palestine? We all know where the Palestinians live. Born circa 490 or 507, and died in the circa 560s. He is the most important source for information about the reign of the Emperor Justinian. The Emperor Justinian, born on 482 AD or 483, and he ruled from 527 AD to 565, and his wife Theodora 547 or 48, from 527 to 531. Procopius was counsel the great general of the time, Belisarius. That's 505 to 565. He was on Belisarius's first Persian campaign. That's down there in Iran, from 527 to 531, and later took part in an expedition against the Vandals. There were these punks, these skateboard teenagers spray painting everything. They were Vandals, and they had to fight. No, actually, Vandals, the word for Vandals came from, it was like a Germanic tribe of people that the Romans fought, and that fought the Romans spectacularly in some occasions. But okay, so that's where the word Vandal came from. It's an epithet that's attributable to this period in Roman history in many ways. Okay, so the expedition against the Vandals was 533 to 534. That's like 500 years, a half a millennium after the time of Jesus. Okay, so Procopius, ambiguous pronoun there, he, Procopius, was in Italy on the Gothic campaign until 540, after which he lived in Constantinople. Since he describes the Great Plague of 542 in the capital, it's of interest these days. Have you ever heard about a great disease sweeping the world where a lot of people die or whatever? You have not heard about any of them until you've heard about this one. Yeah, because this went on for a long time. Okay. His life after that is largely unknown, although he was given the title Illustris in 560, and may have been prefect of Constantinople in 562 and 563. He wrote a number of official histories, including On the Wars in 8 books, Polemon or De Bellis, published in 552, with an edition in 554, and On the Buildings in 6 books, Perikitismaton or De Edificiis, published in 561. He also left a secret history, Anecdota, i.e. unpublished things, not anecdotes, probably written in around 550 AD, and published after his death, which was a massive, the book, that is, the Anecdota, a massive attack, which refers to the Anecdota, a massive attack on the character of Justinian and his wife Theodora. So sinful. Parts are so vitriolic, not to say pornographic, especially chapter 9, that for some time translations from Greek were only available into Latin. Gibbon, in chapter 40 of Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, wrote about Theodora that her arts must have veiled in the obscurity of a learned language. Her arts must be veiled in the obscurity of a learned language. And then went on to quote the passage in Greek. With Latin comments, the secret history claims to provide explanations and additions that the author could not insert into his work on the wars for fear of retribution from Justinian and Theodora. Oh, they never would have. They never would have retributioned him. Or maybe not. Since both before and afterward Procopius wrote approvingly of the emperor, it was suggested in the past that he that he was not the author of the work, but it is now generally accepted that Procopius wrote it. You got that? It's the vicissitudes of time and master's degrees, It's like if everybody said, well, he didn't write it, for a long time, then new master students have to say, well, he didn't write it, And then after a while, they'll come back and some other master student, he didn't write it. It's, you got to pay all those provosts and vice presidents and everything at colleges these days. They got really high salaries, so we got to keep revisiting all this stuff. In my view, they have these techniques now of analyzing text with computers, and I want to know if they've done that yet. Where you can use the computer, and the computer comes back and goes, "This is the same person that wrote this." Analysis of the text, which show no contradictions in point of fact between the secret history and other works, as well as a linguistic and grammatical analysis, makes this a conclusive opinion. See? What did I tell you? Just wait. Okay, we can skip over the bibliography. You can get this online. I think it's the medieval source book or something like that. But this is in the public domain. And we're going to get to see the contents as we go along. Okay, Anecdota by the historian. And what I have written on the Roman wars up to the present point, the story was arranged in chronological order, and as completely as times then permitted. What I shall write now follows a different plan, supplementing the previous formal chronicle with a disclosure of what really happened throughout the Roman Empire. You see, it was not possible during the life of certain persons to write the truth of what they did, as a historian should. If I had, their hordes of spies would have found out about it. They would have put me to a most horrible death. I could not even trust my nearest relatives. That is why I was compelled to hide the real explanation of many matters glossed over in my previous books. You on the edge of your seat yet? These secrets it is now my duty to tell. My duty. It's one of my duties. To tell and reveal the remaining hidden matters and motives. Yet, when I approach this different task, I find it hard indeed to have to stammer and retract about what I've written before about the lives of Justinian and Theodora. Worse yet, it occurs to me that what I am now about to tell will seem neither probable nor plausible to future generations, especially as time flows on and my story becomes ancient history. I fear they may think me a writer of fiction, and even put me among the poets. A fate worse than death. However, I have this much to cheer me, that my account will not be unendorsed by other testimony, so I shall not shrink from the duty of completing this work. For the men of today, who know best the truth of these matters, will be trustworthy witnesses to posterity of the accuracy of my evidence. Still another thing for a long time deferred my passion to relieve myself of this untold tale, for I wondered if it might be prejudicial to future generations, and the wickedness of these deeds had not best remained unknown to later times, lest future tyrants, hearing, might emulate them. That's an idea we find recurring, don't explain to these assholes how to do this stuff. It's bad enough these other guys did it, but don't teach other people how to do it. Okay, it's something to think about. It is deplorably natural that most monarchs mimic the sins of their predecessors and are most readily disposed to turn to the evils of the past. But finally, I was again constrained to proceed with this history, for the reason that future tyrants may see also that those who thus err cannot avoid retribution in the end, since the persons of whom I write suffered that judgment. Furthermore, the disclosure of these actions and tempers will be published for all time, and in consequence others will perhaps feel less aged to transgress. For those who now know of the unchastened life of Semiramis, or the madness of Sardanapalus or Nero, if the record had not thus been written by men of their own times? What? For who now would know of the unchastened life of Semiramis, or the madness of Sardanapalus or Nero, if the record had not thus been written by men of their own times? Besides, even those who suffer similarly from later tyrants will not find this narrative quite profitable. For the miserable find comfort in the philosophy that not on them alone has evil fallen. Accordingly, I begin the tale. First, I shall reveal the folly, the madness of Belisarius, and then the depravity of Justinian and Theodora. 1. How the great general Belisarius was hoodwinked by his wife. Hoodwinked, folks. Hoodwinked. The father of Belisarius' wife, a lady whom I have mentioned in my former books, was, and so was her grandfather, a charioteer, exhibiting that trade in Constantinople and Thessalonica. Her mother was one of the wenches of the theater, and she herself from the first led an utterly wanton life. Acquainted with magic drugs used by her parents before her, she learned how to use those of compelling qualities and became the wedded wife of Belisarius after having already borne many children. Now, she was unfaithful as a wife from the start, but was careful to conceal her indiscretions by the usual precautions, not from any awe of her spouse, for she never felt any shame at anything, and fooled him easily with her deceptions, but because she feared the punishment of the empress, for Theodora hated her, and had already shown her teeth. But when that queen became involved in difficulties, she won her friendship by helping her first to destroy Silverius, as shall be related presently, and later to ruin John of Cappadocia, as I have told elsewhere. After that, she became more and more fearless, casting all concealment aside, abandoned herself to the winds of desire. There was a youth from Thrace in the house of Belisarius, Theodosius by name, and of the Eunomian heresy by descent. On the eve of his expedition to Libya, Belisarius baptized this boy in holy water and received him in his arms as a member henceforth of the family, welcoming him with his wife as their son, according to the Christian rite of adoption. And Antonina not only embraced Theodosius with reasonable fondness as her son by holy word, and thus cared for him, but soon, while her husband was away on his campaign, became wildly in love with him, and out of her senses with his malady shook off all fear and shame of God and man. She began enjoying him surreptitiously, and ended by dallying with him in the presence of the men servants and waiting maids, for she was now possessed by passion, openly overwhelmed with love, could see no hindrance to its consummation. Once in Carthage, Belisarius caught her in the very act, but allowed himself to be deceived by his wife. Finding the two in an underground room, he was very angry, but she said, showing no fear or attempt to keep anything hidden, "I came here with the boy to bury the most precious part of our plunder, where the emperor will not discover it." So she said, by way of excuse, and he dismissed the matter as if he believed her, even as he saw Theodosius's trousers belt somewhat modestly unfastened. For so bound by love for the woman was he that he preferred to distrust the evidence of his own eyes. As her folly progressed to an indescribable extent, those who saw what was going on kept silent, except one slave, Macedonia by name. When Belisarius was in Syracuse, as the conqueror of Sicily, she made her master swear solemnly never to betray her to her mistress, and then told him the whole story, presenting as witnesses two slave boys attending the bedchamber. When he heard this, Belisarius ordered one of his guards to put Theodosius away, but the latter learned of this in time to flee to Ephesus. For most of the servants, inspired by the weakness of the husband's character, were more anxious to please his wife than to show loyalty to him, and so betrayed the order he had given. But Constantine, when he saw Belisarius' grief at what had befallen him, sympathized entirely, except to comment, "I would have tried to kill the woman rather than the young man." Antonina heard of this and hated him in secret. How malicious was her spite against him shall be shown, for she was a scorpion who could hide or sting. But not long after this, by the enchantment either of philters or of her caresses, she persuaded her husband that the charges against her were untrue. Without more ado, he sent word to Theodosius to return and promised to turn Macedonia and the 2 slave boys over to his wife. She first cruelly cut out their tongues, it is said, and then cut their bodies into little bits, which were put into sacks and thrown into the sea. One of her slaves, Eugenius, who had already wrought the outrage on Silverius, helped her in this crime. And it was not long after this that Belisarius was persuaded by his wife to kill Constantine. What happened at that time concerning Presidius and the daggers I have narrated in my previous books. For while Belisarius would have preferred to let Constantine alone, Antonina gave him no peace until his remark, which I have just repeated, was avenged. And as a result of this murder, much enmity was aroused against Belisarius in the hearts of the emperor and all the most important of the Romans. So matters progressed, but Theodosius said he was unable to return to Italy, where Belisarius and Antonina were now staying, unless Photius were put out of the way. For this Photius was the sort who would bite if anyone got the better of him in anything, and he had reason to be choked with indignation at Theodosius. Though he was the rightful son, he was utterly disregarded, while the other grew in power and riches. They say that from the 2 palaces at Carthage and Ravenna, Theodosius had taken plunder amounting to 100 centenaries, as he alone had been given the management of these conquered properties. But Antonina, when she learned of Theodosius's fear, never ceased laying snares for her son and planning deadly plots against his welfare, until he saw that he would have to escape to Constantinople if he wished to live. Then Theodosius came to Italy and her. There they stayed in the satisfaction of their love, unhindered by the complacent husband, and later she took them both to Constantinople. There Theodosius became so worried lest the affair became generally known that he was at his wit's end. He saw it would be impossible to fool everybody, as the woman was no longer able to conceal her passion and indulge it secretly, but thought nothing of being in fact in a reputation of an avowed adulteress. Therefore he went back to Ephesus, and having his head shaved after the religious custom, became a monk. Whereupon Antonina, insane over her loss, exhibited her grief by donning mourning, and went around the house shrieking and wailing, lamenting, even in the presence of her husband, what a good friend she had lost, how faithful, how tender, how loving, how energetic. In the end, even her spouse was won over to join in her sorrow, and so the poor wretch wept too, calling for his beloved Theodosius. Later he even went to the emperor and implored both him and the empress, till they consented to summon Theodosius to return, as one who was and would always be a necessity in the house of Belisarius. Oh, brother. But Theodosius refused to leave his monastery, saying he was completely resolved to give himself forever to the cloistered life. This noble pronouncement, however, was not entirely sincere, for he was aware that as soon as Belisarius left Constantinople, it would be possible for him to come secretly to Antonina, which indeed he did. 2. How belated jealousy affected Belisarius's military judgment. For soon Belisarius went off to war on Chosroes, and he took Photius with him, but Antonina remained behind, though this was contrary to her usual habit. She had always preferred to voyage wherever her husband went, lest he, being alone, come to his senses, and forgetting her enchantments, think of her for once as she deserved. But now, so that Theodosius might have free access to her, he planned once more how to rid herself permanently of Photius. She bribed some of Belisarius's guards to slander and insult her son at all times, while she, writing letters almost every day, denounced him, and thus set everything in motion against him. Compelled by all of this to counterplot against his mother, Photius got a witness to come from Constantinople with evidence of Theodosius's commerce with Antonina. Commerce. He took him to Belisarius and commanded him to tell him the whole story. When Belisarius heard it, he became passionately angry, fell at Photius's feet, kissed them, and begged him to revenge one who had been so wronged by those who should least have treated him thus. My dearest boy, he said, your father, whoever he was, you have never known, for he left you at your mother's breast when the sands of his life were measured, nor have you even benefited from his estate, since he was not overblessed with wealth, but brought up by me. Though I was your only stepfather, you have arrived at an age where it becomes you to avenge my wrongs. I, who have raised you to consular rank and given you the opportunity of acquiring such riches, might call myself your father and mother and entire kindred. And I would be right, my son, for it is not by their kinship of blood, but by their friendly deeds that men are wont to measure their bonds to one another. That's what he said. Now the hour has come when you must not only look on me in the ruin of my household and the loss of my greatest treasure, but as one sharing the shame of your mother in the reproach of all mankind. And consider, too, that the sins of women injure not only their husbands, but touch even more bitterly their children, whose reputation suffers the greater from this reason that they are expected to inherit the disposition of those who bore them. Yet remember this of me, that I still love my wife exceedingly well, and if it is in my power to punish the ruiner of my house, to her I shall do no hurt. But while Theodosius is present, I cannot condone this charge against her. When he had heard this, Photius agreed to serve him in everything, but at the same time he was afraid lest some trouble might come to himself from it, for he had little confidence in Belisarius' strength of will where his wife was concerned. And among other unhappy possibilities, he remembered with distaste what had happened to Macedonia. I would be remembering that too. So he had Belisarius exchange with him all the oaths that are held most sacred and binding among Christians, and each swore never to betray the other, even in the most mortal peril. Now for the present they decided the time had not yet come to take action. But as soon as Antonina should arrive from Constantinople and Theodosius return to Ephesus, Photius was to go to Ephesus and dispose without difficulty of Theodosius and his property. Dispose of him and his property. It was at this time that they had invaded the Persian country with the entire army, and there occurred to John of Cappadocia what is reported in my previous works. There I had to hush up one matter out of prudence, namely, that it was not without malice aforethought that Antonina deceived John and his daughter, but by many oaths, than which none is more reverenced by the Christians, she induced them to trust her as one who would never use them ill. After she had done this, feeling more confident than before of the friendship of the emperor, she sent Theodosius to Ephesus, and herself, with no suspicion of opposition, set out for the east. Belisarius had just taken the fort of Caesaranum when the news of her coming was brought to him, and he, setting everything else as nothing in comparison, ordered the army to retire. It so happened, as I have shown elsewhere, that other things had occurred to the expedition which fitted in with his order to withdraw. However, as I said in the foreword to this book, it was not safe for me at that time to tell all the underlying motives of these events. Accusation was consequently made against Belisarius by all the Romans that he had put the most urgent affairs of state below the lesser interest of his personal household. For the fact was that, possessed with jealous passion for his wife, he was unwilling to go far away from Roman territory, so that as soon as he should learn his wife was coming from Constantinople, he would immediately seize her and avenge himself on Theodosius. For this reason, he ordered the forces under Aretas to cross the Tigris River, and they returned home, having accomplished nothing worthy of mention. And he himself was careful not to leave the Roman frontier for much more than an hour's ride. Indeed, the fort of Caesaranum, going by way of the city of Nisibis, is not more than a day's journey for a well-mounted man from the Roman border, and by another route is only half that distance. Yet, if he had been willing, in the beginning to cross the Tigris with his entire army, I believe he would have taken all the plunder in the land of Assyria and marched as far as the city of Ctesiphon with none to hinder him. And he could have rescued the captured Antiochians and whatever other Romans misfortune had brought there and restored them to their native lands. He could have. Yeah. Furthermore, he was culpable for Khosrow's unhindered return home from Colchis. How this happened I shall now reveal. When Khosrow's Kabade's son, invading the land of Colchis, accomplished not only what I have elsewhere narrated, but captured Petra, a great part of the army of the Medes was destroyed, either in battle or because of the difficulty of the country. For Lazica, as I have explained, is almost roadless and very mountainous. Also, pestilence falling upon them had destroyed most of the army, and many had died from lack of necessary food and treatment. It was at this time that messengers came from Persia with news that Belisarius, having conquered Nebides in battle before the city of Nisibis, was approaching, that he had taken the fort of Caesaranum by siege, captured at the point of the spear Bleshems and 800 Persian cavalry, and that he had sent a second army of Romans under Aretas, ruler of the Saracens, to cross the Tigris and ravage all the land there that Heterophore had not known fear. It happened also that the army of Huns, which Khosrow had sent into Roman Armenia to create a diversion there, so that the Romans would not notice his expedition into Lazica, had fallen into the hands of Valerian and his Romans, as other messengers now reported, and that these barbarians had been badly beaten in battle, and most of them killed. When the Persians heard this, already in low spirits over their ill fortune among the Lazi, they now feared if they should meet a hostile army in their present difficulties among precipices and wilderness, they would all perish in disorder. And they feared too for their children and their wives and their country. Indeed, the noblest men in the army of the Medes reviled Khosrow, calling him one who had broken his plighted word and the common law of man by invading in time of peace the land of the Romans. He had wronged, they cried, the oldest and greatest of all nations, which he could not possibly surpass in war. A mutiny was imminent. Aroused at this, Khosrow found the following remedy for the trouble. He read them a letter which the empress had recently written to Zaberganes. This was the letter. How highly I esteem you, Zaberganes, and that I believe you friendly to our state, you who were ambassador to us not so long ago, are well aware. Would you not be acting suitably to this high opinion which I have for you, if you could persuade King Khosrow to choose peace with our government? If you do this, I can promise you will be rewarded by my husband, who does nothing without my advice. Khosrow read this aloud and asked the Persian leaders if they thought this was an empire which a woman managed. Thus he calmed their nervousness. But even so, he withdrew from the place with considerable anxiety, thinking that at any moment Belisarius' forces would confront him. And when none of the enemy appeared to bar his retreat, with great relief he marched back to his native land. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the next thrilling and exciting installment of the section of the chapter of the Anecdota of Procopius, with the reading Calvin of the world with bedtime stories for the baby show that this is. Join us again next time when we continue the Anecdota for the ramifications of your edifications. And until that time, goodbye.